Eleanor Whitmore grabbed the photograph of Victoria's dead father and ground her Louboutin heel into his smiling face. "Take your garbage and get out of my house, street rat." Victoria stood in the marble foyer, clutching a trash bag containing everything she was allowed to keep after 4 years of marriage. Her husband Marcus watched from the staircase, his arm wrapped around his 23-year-old mistress. But Eleanor made one fatal mistake. She never ran a background check on her daughter-in-law's birth certificate. 3 days later, when the judge read Victoria's real last name aloud, Eleanor's legs gave out completely. Comment your city below, so I can see how far this story travels. The crystal chandelier cast a cold light over the marble foyer of the Whitmore estate as Eleanor Whitmore's fingers closed around the photograph. Victoria's heart stopped. "No, please, that's my father's picture. It's all I have left of him." Eleanor held the photograph up to the light, examining the image of the young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. "This man?" Eleanor's lip curled. "This nobody?" "Give it back, please." Eleanor looked at her son Marcus, who stood on the grand staircase with his arm draped around Amber Chen, his 23-year-old executive assistant. Marcus raised his glass of scotch in a mock toast. "Let her have it, Mother. It's worthless anyway, just like her." Eleanor smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 62 years crushing anyone who stood in her way. She dropped the photograph on the marble floor. Victoria lunged forward. "No!" But Eleanor was faster. Her red-soled Louboutin heel came down on the photograph with a crack that echoed through the foyer. She twisted her foot, grinding the image of Victoria's father into the cold stone. "Oops," Eleanor said. Victoria fell to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached for the photograph, now torn and marked with the imprint of Eleanor's heel. 4 years, Victoria whispered, her voice cracking. "I gave you 4 years. I nursed Marcus through his surgery. I managed this house. I hosted your charity galas. I did everything you asked." "And yet," Eleanor said, examining her manicured nails, "you still smell like the flower shop we found you in." Marcus descended the stairs, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble. Amber clung to his arm, wearing a dress Victoria recognized from her own closet. "Don't be dramatic, Victoria." Marcus took a sip of his scotch. "You knew this was coming. You signed the prenup. You get nothing." "I never asked for anything." "Exactly," Marcus laughed. "That's the problem, darling. You have nothing to offer. No connections, no family, no money. You are a charity project, and the charity has run its course." Victoria stood up slowly, clutching the damaged photograph to her chest. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to look her husband in the eye. "I was your wife." "You were a placeholder," Amber said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was sharp, confident. Marcus needed someone born while he was building the company. Now that Whitmore Industries is worth $3 billion, he needs someone who matches his status. Victoria stared at the young woman wearing her clothes, standing in her house, holding her husband's arm. "You're 23 years old," Victoria said quietly. "You have no idea what you're getting into." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm getting into." Amber held up her left hand. A massive diamond ring sparkled on her finger. "I'm getting into a penthouse on 5th Avenue, a house in the Hamptons, and a private jet." "What are you getting into, Victoria? A bus station?" Marcus snorted with laughter. Eleanor snapped her fingers at the 2 security guards standing by the door. "Gerald, Thomas, make sure she doesn't steal anything on her way out. You know how these street people are. They like to pocket silverware." Gerald, a man Victoria had made breakfast for countless times over the past 4 years, stepped forward. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Ma'am, we need to check your bag." Victoria looked down at the black garbage bag at her feet. Eleanor had insisted she pack her belongings in it instead of a suitcase. The suitcases were Whitmore property. It's just clothes, Victoria said. A few shirts. My toothbrush. Open it, Eleanor commanded. Victoria's hand shook as she untied the knot. The bag fell open, revealing a pathetic collection of faded t-shirts and worn jeans. Nothing designer. Nothing expensive. Nothing that came from the Whitmore fortune. Eleanor kicked the bag over with her pointed toe. The contents spilled across the marble floor. Victoria's father's photograph fluttered out, landing face up next to a pair of old sneakers. Pathetic, Eleanor muttered. This is everything you accumulated in 4 years of marriage to my son? This is what you're worth? I never took anything that wasn't mine. Because there was nothing you could take. Eleanor stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming. You were a waitress when Marcus found you. A waitress with dirt under her fingernails and dreams too big for your station. I told him not to marry you. I told him you were beneath us. But he insisted you were harmless. She grabbed Victoria's chin, forcing her to meet her eyes. And you were harmless, weren't you? Just a scared little girl playing dress-up in a world she doesn't belong in. Victoria pulled her face away. I loved your son. Love. Eleanor spat the word like a curse. Love doesn't pay for private jets. Love doesn't close business deals. Love doesn't matter in our world, you stupid girl. Marcus checked his watch. Mother, the car is waiting. We have dinner at the club. Of course, dear. Eleanor turned back to Victoria. The Uber is at the gate. I didn't pay for it, obviously. I assume you have cash? Oh, wait. You don't have anything, do you? She laughed, and Amber laughed with her. Victoria gathered her belongings, stuffing them back into the garbage bag with trembling hands. She picked up her father's photograph, wiping Eleanor's heel print against her shirt. You're making a mistake, Victoria said. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke with a quiet steadiness that momentarily silenced the room. Marcus set down his glass. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Eleanor let out a sharp bark of laughter. A threat? From you? You're a florist from Vermont, Victoria. You're nobody. You have no family, no connections, and a GED you probably cheated to get. I am not nobody. You are exactly nobody. Eleanor's voice turned to ice. And in about 5 minutes, you won't even be that. You'll be a woman standing on the side of the road in the rain, wondering where her life went wrong. That's your future, Victoria. That's all you'll ever be. Victoria slung the garbage bag over her shoulder. She looked at Marcus one last time. I gave you everything, Marcus. I would have walked through fire for you. But I didn't want a woman who would walk through fire for me. Marcus smiled, his cruel smile. I wanted a woman whose father could write a check for $50 million. Amber's father can do that. What can your father do? Oh, wait. He's dead. Something inside Victoria went quiet. Not broken. Quiet. Like the silence before a storm. Goodbye, Marcus. Get her out, Eleanor commanded. Now! Gerald and Thomas grabbed Victoria's arms. They marched her toward the heavy oak doors, their grips firm but not painful. Gerald whispered something under his breath. I'm sorry, ma'am. Victoria said nothing. They opened the doors. Rain poured down in sheets, instantly soaking the stone steps. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled across the Connecticut countryside. The guards hesitated. Wait for the rain to ease? Gerald suggested to his partner. Now! Eleanor's voice carried from inside. Get the trash out of my house! They pushed Victoria out into the storm. The doors slammed shut behind her. She heard the deadbolt slide into place with a finality that echoed in her chest. Victoria stood in the driveway, the rain instantly soaking through her thin sweater. Her garbage bag grew heavy with water. Her father's photograph was getting ruined again, but she clutched it anyway. She looked back at the Whitmore estate. 27 bedrooms, a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses, gardens that required a staff of 12 to maintain. 4 years of her life, erased in 20 minutes. She started walking down the long driveway. The gravel crunched under her worn sneakers. By the time she reached the iron gates, she was shivering uncontrollably. The Uber was gone. Either it had given up waiting, or Eleanor had called to cancel it. Victoria stood on the side of the deserted road, rain streaming down her face. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Everything she had built, everything she had tried to become, gone. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers closed around something small and hard. They had taken her credit cards. They had taken her phone, claiming it was on the company plan. They had taken her car keys, her jewelry, even the coat she was wearing when she arrived at the estate this morning. But they hadn't checked the secret pocket sewn into the lining of her jeans. Victoria pulled out a small burner phone. She had bought it 3 weeks ago, the moment she found the divorce papers hidden in Marcus's briefcase. She had hoped she would never need to use it. She stared at the phone, rain dripping off her nose. There was a number saved in the contacts. Just one number. A number she hadn't called in 12 years. A number she had promised herself she would never use again. But some promises were meant to be broken. She pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. It sounded like old leather and expensive whiskey. Victoria closed her eyes. "Uncle Theodore." Silence on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like the line had gone dead. Then the voice returned, trembling slightly. "Victoria? Is that really you?" "It's me." "My God." She could hear him struggling to control his emotion. 12 years. 12 years without a word. We thought you might be dead. Your grandfather has investigators looking for you on 3 continents. I know. I'm sorry. I needed to disappear. Where are you? Are you safe? Victoria looked around at the dark, empty road. The rain was coming down harder now. She could barely see 10 feet in front of her. I'm in Connecticut, on the side of a road. Marcus Whitmore just threw me out. Whitmore. The voice turned dark, deadly. That hedge fund boy with a real estate company? Yes. The one who inherited his father's business and thinks he built it himself? Yes. Another pause. When Theodore spoke again, his voice was ice cold. What did he do to you? He divorced me. He humiliated me. His mother stepped on Dad's photograph. Victoria's voice cracked. She ground her heel into his face, Uncle Theodore. Into Dad's face. The sound that came through the phone was not quite human. It was a growl, low and dangerous. Stay right where you are. Do not move. I am sending the helicopter. It will be there in 20 minutes. Uncle Theodore, I need you to understand something. What? Victoria wiped the rain from her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I want to destroy them. I want to take everything they have, their money, their company, their reputation, their future. I want them to feel what I felt tonight. I want them to know what it's like to have nothing. Theodore was quiet for a moment. Victoria, my dear girl, do you remember what your grandfather always said? Remind me. We are Thorntons. Theodore's voice was soft, almost gentle. We don't just ruin people. We erase them from existence. We don't just take their money. We take their legacy. We don't just win. We make sure they can never recover. Victoria felt something shift inside her. The scared girl who had run away 12 years ago was still there, but something else was waking up. Something she had buried deep. I remember. Good. Because Marcus Whitmore just made the worst mistake of his life. He married a Thornton and didn't know it. He threw out a Thornton and laughed about it. And now he's going to learn why our family name makes grown men weep. How bad will it be for him? Theodore chuckled. It was not a pleasant sound. Victoria, do you know who holds the mortgage on the Whitmore estate? No. Thornton National Bank. We've held it for 15 years. Do you know who the largest institutional investor in Whitmore Industries is? Victoria's breath caught. You're not serious. Thornton Capital owns 18% of his company. We've been quietly buying shares for the past decade. We are literally his largest shareholder outside of his family. He doesn't know? Of course not. We use shell companies, offshore accounts, layers upon layers of legal entities. Marcus Whitmore has been dancing in the palm of our hand for years, and he has no idea. Victoria started to laugh. It was a broken sound at first, mixed with tears and rain, but it grew stronger. He thought I was nobody. He thought you were a florist from Vermont. I am a florist from Vermont. That's who I chose to be. But that's not who you were born to be. Theodore's voice softened. You are Victoria Adelaide Thornton, granddaughter of Harrison Thornton, founder of the Thornton banking dynasty. Your family doesn't just have money, Victoria. We have power. The kind of power that makes and breaks fortunes with a phone call. I ran away from that. Yes, and your grandfather has never stopped waiting for you to come home. Victoria heard another sound through the phone, the distant chop of helicopter blades. I hear it, she said. 20 minutes, just like I promised. Arthur's on board. Do you remember Arthur? How could I forget? He taught me to ride horses when I was 7. He's been your grandfather's head of security for 40 years. He's also spent the last 12 years personally supervising the search for you. I think he might cry when he sees you. I might cry too. Cry all you want, my dear, but cry on the helicopter. We have work to do. Theodore paused. The court date for your divorce is scheduled for Tuesday. Marcus's lawyers are expecting you to default. They're expecting a scared, penniless woman with no representation. Then that's exactly what they'll see. I'm sorry? Victoria smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had worn in years. I have a plan, Uncle Theodore. I've been preparing for this moment for 4 years. I didn't just let Marcus treat me like a servant. I watched. I listened. I collected. Collected what? Evidence. 4 years of recordings, financial documents, emails, text messages, proof of affairs, tax fraud, and business dealings that would make the SEC very interested. Theodore was silent for a long moment. You planned this. Not this exactly, but I knew Marcus would discard me eventually. I saw how he treated people. I watched him destroy business partners, employees, friends. I knew my turn would come. So I prepared. Victoria, you brilliant, magnificent girl. Your grandfather is going to be so proud. I also did something else. What? I passed the bar exam 3 years ago, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. I studied online while Marcus was out with his mistresses. I took the tests under my mother's maiden name. Theodore started laughing, really laughing, the kind of deep belly laugh she hadn't heard since she was a child. You passed the bar? Top 2% in all 3 states. And Marcus doesn't know? Marcus doesn't know anything about me. He never asked. He never cared. He thought I was a simple girl with a simple mind. Victoria's voice hardened. He's about to learn how wrong he was. The helicopter sound was louder now. Through the rain, Victoria could see lights in the sky getting closer. I have to go, Uncle Theodore. The helicopter is almost here. Victoria. Yes? Welcome home. The helicopter touched down in a field half a mile from the Whitmore estate. It was sleek, black, and unmarked. The kind of aircraft that cost more than most people's houses. A man jumped out before the rotors had even slowed. He was in his 60s, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored suit despite the rain. He stopped 10 feet away from Victoria, staring at her like she was a ghost. "Miss Victoria?" "Hello, Arthur." Arthur's composure cracked. Tears streamed down his weathered face. 12 years. 12 years I've been looking for you. I know, I'm sorry. He stepped forward and wrapped her in a hug so tight she could barely breathe. He smelled like expensive cologne and gun oil, the same as he had when she was a child. "Your grandfather," Arthur said, his voice thick. "He never gave up, not once. Every birthday, every Christmas, he sets a place for you at the table, every single year." Victoria felt her own tears start to fall, mixing with the rain. "I was so scared, Arthur. Scared of being a Thornton. Scared of the expectations. Scared of becoming someone I didn't want to be." Arthur pulled back and looked at her. His eyes, which she had always thought were hard as stone, were soft with emotion. "And now?" Victoria looked back toward the Whitmore estate, invisible in the darkness, but still present in her mind. "Now I'm ready to be exactly who I was born to be." Arthur nodded slowly. He reached into the helicopter and pulled out a cashmere blanket and a thermos of hot tea. "Then let's go home, Miss Victoria. Your grandfather is waiting." As the helicopter lifted off, Victoria looked down at the Connecticut countryside. Somewhere in the darkness below, Marcus and Eleanor were probably sitting down to dinner at their country club, toasting their successful evening. They had no idea what was coming. Victoria pulled the damaged photograph of her father from her pocket. His smiling face was still visible beneath the heel print and the water damage. "I'm sorry I hid for so long, Dad," she whispered. "But I'm not hiding anymore." She looked out at the night sky, at the lights of distant cities glittering like diamonds. 3 days until the court date. 3 days until Marcus Whitmore learned exactly who he had married. 3 days until the name Victoria Adelaide Thornton was spoken aloud in a courtroom, and the Whitmore family's world came crashing down. Victoria sipped her tea and smiled. She couldn't wait. The helicopter cut through the night sky like a blade. Victoria pressed her face against the cold glass, watching the lights of Connecticut fade into darkness below. Her wet clothes clung to her skin, but she barely noticed. The cashmere blanket Arthur had wrapped around her shoulders felt like armor. "Miss Victoria," Arthur's voice was gentle, "we'll be landing in Manhattan in 15 minutes. Your grandfather wanted me to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" Arthur hesitated. "He's not well. The doctors say his heart is failing. He has maybe a year left, maybe less. But when your uncle called him tonight, when he heard you were alive and coming home..." "What happened?" "He got out of bed for the first time in 3 weeks. He's been in his wheelchair ever since your grandmother passed. But tonight, he made the staff dress him in his best suit. He's waiting for you on the helipad." Victoria closed her eyes. She remembered her grandfather as a giant of a man, 6'4", with shoulders like a linebacker, and a voice that could shake walls. The idea of him frail and dying felt impossible. "I should have come home sooner." "You're here now. That's all that matters to him." The helicopter banked left, and suddenly the Manhattan skyline filled the window. Victoria saw the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the new towers that had risen during her 12 years away. But dominating them all was a monolith of black glass that stood taller than everything around it. Thornton Tower, her family's headquarters, her family's legacy. The building her grandfather had constructed 50 years ago with nothing but determination and a brilliant mind for finance. "I forgot how big it was," Victoria whispered. Your grandfather added 12 floors while you were gone, Arthur said. He said he was building them for you, for when you came back to run the company. I never wanted to run the company. I know, but he never stopped believing you would. The helicopter descended toward the roof of Thornton Tower. Victoria could see figures waiting on the helipad, silhouettes against the bright lights. Her heart pounded in her chest. The moment the skids touched down, Arthur opened the door. Wind whipped through the cabin, carrying the sounds of the city far below. Victoria stepped out. A man sat in a wheelchair at the edge of the helipad. He had white hair, fierce eyes, and oxygen tubes in his nose. His hands gripped the armrests with surprising strength. Harrison Thornton, the man who had built an empire from nothing. The man who had raised her after her parents died. The man she had abandoned 12 years ago. Victoria's legs felt weak. She wanted to run to him, but she couldn't move. Harrison's voice cut through the wind. It was weaker than she remembered, but still carried the authority of a king. Are you going to stand there all night, or are you going to hug your grandfather? Victoria ran. She fell to her knees on the wet concrete, throwing her arms around the old man. He smelled like pipe tobacco and old books, exactly as she remembered. "Grandpa," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left." Harrison's trembling hands came up to stroke her wet hair. "Shh. You're here now. That's all that matters." "I was scared. I didn't want to be a Thornton. I didn't want the pressure, the expectations, I know," Harrison's voice cracked. "I pushed too hard. After your parents died, I tried to turn you into a warrior. But you were just a child who needed love, not training." Victoria pulled back, looking into her grandfather's eyes. They were wet with tears. "I never stopped loving you, Grandpa. Not for one day. And I never stopped looking for you." Harrison touched her cheek with a shaking hand. 12 years of private investigators. 12 years of hope and disappointment. 12 years of setting your place at the dinner table and pretending you would walk through the door. "I'm home now." "Yes." Harrison's expression changed. The softness faded, replaced by something harder, something dangerous. "And I understand you have business to attend to?" Victoria wiped her eyes. "Marcus Whitmore. Theodore told me everything. The divorce, the prenup. That woman stepping on your father's photograph. She ground her heel into his face, Grandpa. Into my father's face." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Your father was my son. My only child. The photograph Eleanor Whitmore desecrated is the last image we have of him, before the accident that killed him and your mother." "I know. Does Eleanor Whitmore know whose son she was disrespecting?" "She has no idea. She thinks I'm a florist from Vermont, with no family and no connections." Harrison smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Then let's educate her." Theodore appeared from behind the wheelchair, looking exactly as Victoria remembered him. Tall, thin, with the sharp eyes of a hawk and the patience of a snake. "Welcome home, niece." "Uncle Theodore. I've assembled the War Council. 14 of our best lawyers are waiting in the conference room. We have 3 days to prepare for your court date." Victoria stood up, straightening her wet clothes. "Then let's not waste time." The conference room on the 47th floor was the size of a basketball court. A mahogany table stretched from one end to the other, surrounded by leather chairs. The walls were lined with portraits of Thornton ancestors going back 6 generations. Victoria walked in, still wearing her damp clothes, her hair plastered to her face. 14 lawyers in expensive suits turned to stare at her. She recognized some of them. Jessica Thorne, the senior partner who had been with the firm for 30 years. Robert Chen, the corporate litigation specialist. Margaret Willis, the forensic accountant who had once helped take down a sitting senator. They all stood as she entered. "Please," Victoria said, "sit down." She took her place at the head of the table. Harrison's wheelchair was positioned at her right hand. Theodore stood behind her like a guardian. I assume you've all been briefed, Victoria said. Jessica Thorne nodded. Your uncle provided the basics, but we have questions. Ask them. First, and most important, Jessica leaned forward. Why did you sign the prenup? Your family's net worth is estimated at $47 billion. Why would you sign a document that gives you nothing? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Because I was in love, she said finally. And because I was hiding. 12 years ago, I ran away from this family. I changed my name to Victoria Hayes and moved to Vermont. I became a florist. I wanted a simple life, away from the expectations and the pressure and the constant scrutiny. And then you met Marcus Whitmore. His car broke down outside my flower shop. He was charming. He was handsome. He treated me like I was special. Victoria's voice hardened. What I didn't realize was that he only valued me because I was beneath him. He didn't love my simplicity. He loved having power over it. So you signed the prenup to maintain your cover, Theodore said. To keep him from discovering you were a Thornton. Yes, and I convinced myself that it didn't matter, that our love was real. When did you realize it wasn't? Victoria looked at her hands. 6 months into the marriage, I caught him with his assistant in our bedroom. When I confronted him, he laughed. He said I should be grateful he married me at all. He said I was lucky to have a roof over my head. Did you consider leaving then? Every day, but I had nowhere to go. I couldn't come home because I was too proud, and I couldn't start over because I had nothing. So I stayed. And you started collecting evidence. Victoria nodded. I realized that Marcus would eventually discard me. I saw how he treated people. Employees, business partners, even his own mother. Everyone was disposable to him. So I prepared. She reached into her garbage bag, which Arthur had brought from the helicopter. She pulled out a USB drive. 4 years of recordings. Every conversation in the Whitmore household was captured by a system I installed myself. New York is a one-party consent state, and I consented. Jessica took the drive, her eyes widening. What's on here? Evidence of tax fraud, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama, business deals that violate SEC regulations, 3 separate affairs, including one with a woman who was 19 at the time. This is enough to put him in prison, Jessica breathed. I know, but I don't want him in prison. Not yet. What do you want? Victoria looked around the table at the 14 most powerful lawyers in New York. I want to take everything. His company, his house, his reputation, his future. I want him to feel what I felt tonight when they threw me out with a garbage bag. I want Eleanor to know what it's like to have nothing. That's a tall order. Then it's a good thing I have the best legal team in the country. Victoria turned to Harrison. Grandpa, tell them about the Whitmore financials. Harrison smiled that predatory smile again. Whitmore Industries is worth approximately $3 billion on paper, he said. But their debt load is substantial. They have a $200 million loan from First Manhattan Bank that comes due in 6 months. And, Jessica prompted, and Thornton Capital purchased First Manhattan Bank 3 years ago. We own the loan. The lawyers exchanged glances. Furthermore, Theodore added, Thornton Capital has spent the last decade quietly acquiring shares in Whitmore Industries through various shell companies. We currently own 18% of the company. That makes us the largest institutional shareholder outside the Whitmore family. They don't know this? They have no idea. The shares are held through a complex network of offshore entities. It would take a forensic accountant 3 years to trace them back to us. Victoria stood up and began pacing. Marcus filed for divorce on Friday. The preliminary hearing is Tuesday. His lawyers are expecting me to either default or show up with a public defender. They want to enforce the prenup and throw me out with nothing. Based on this evidence, Jessica said, holding up the USB drive. "We can countersue for fraud, perjury, and emotional distress. We can freeze their assets pending a forensic audit. We can expose the offshore accounts to the IRS. Yes, but I don't want to do that on Tuesday." Jessica frowned. "Why not?" "Because I want them to think they've won. I want Marcus and Eleanor to walk into that courtroom, believing they're about to crush a helpless woman. I want them to perjure themselves on the stand. I want them to commit as many crimes as possible before I reveal who I really am." Theodore chuckled. "You want to give them enough rope to hang themselves." "Exactly." "It's risky," Jessica warned. "If the judge grants summary judgment before you can present your evidence—" "He won't." Victoria turned to Harrison. "Grandpa, who's the judge assigned to the case?" "Harold Morrison," Harrison said. "A man I put on the bench 22 years ago." "Can we trust him?" "Trust is a strong word, but Harold knows that the Thornton family has a file on him thick enough to end his career. He won't do anything to upset us." Victoria nodded slowly. "Then here's the plan. I show up to court on Tuesday looking like a broken woman. I wear cheap clothes. I carry my belongings in a paper bag. I let Marcus's lawyers paint me as a gold digger and a thief. And then Eleanor takes the stand. She'll lie under oath about my character. She'll claim I stole from them. She'll say I have no assets and no family. Which is perjury." "Which is perjury," Victoria agreed. "And once she's committed that crime in front of a federal judge, I reveal who I really am." Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then she started to laugh. "You're going to let her dig her own grave. I'm going to hand her the shovel and watch her do it." "And when you reveal your identity?" Victoria's eyes went cold. "I'll introduce a motion to freeze all Whitmore assets. I'll submit evidence of tax fraud. I'll expose the offshore accounts. And I'll announce that I'm representing myself in this case." "Representing yourself?" Robert Chen looked alarmed. "Victoria, with all due respect, you've been out of the legal world for over a decade. Let us handle this." "I passed the bar exam 3 years ago," Victoria said. "New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Top 2% in all 3 states." The room went silent. "You passed the bar?" Jessica's jaw dropped. "While married to Marcus?" "I studied at night while he was out with his mistresses. I took the exams under my mother's maiden name. He never suspected a thing." Harrison slapped the arm of his wheelchair. "That's my granddaughter." "I don't want to hide behind a team of lawyers," Victoria continued. "I want Marcus to see my face when I destroy him. I want Eleanor to know that the woman they called street trash is the one taking everything they have." "It's poetic," Theodore admitted. "But are you sure you can handle a courtroom? It's been a long time since you practiced." Victoria turned to face the portrait on the wall behind her. It was a painting of her father, Alexander Thornton, who had died in a car accident when she was 10 years old. He had her eyes, her chin, her quiet determination. "My father never got to see me graduate law school," Victoria said softly. "He never got to watch me argue a case or cross-examine a witness." Eleanor Whitmore stepped on his photograph tonight. She ground her heel into his face and called him worthless. She turned back to the room. "I am going to stand in that courtroom and show her exactly what her contempt has cost her. And when I'm done, there won't be enough left of the Whitmore family to fill a garbage bag." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria worked around the clock with the legal team, reviewing evidence, planning strategy, and rehearsing her performance. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours total, but she had never felt more awake. On Monday night, she sat alone in the Thornton Tower penthouse, looking out at the city lights. In her hands was the photograph of her father, now carefully restored by a specialist Harrison had hired. "I'm scared, Dad," she whispered to the image. "What if I fail? What if they see through me? What if Marcus wins? The photograph didn't answer, of course. But as Victoria stared at her father's kind eyes, she remembered something he had told her when she was very young. Fear is just excitement without breathing. When you're scared, take a deep breath and remember that you're a Thornton. We don't run from fights, we win them. Victoria took a deep breath. The door opened behind her. Harrison rolled in, his wheelchair humming softly on the hardwood floor. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too nervous." "Good. Nerves keep you sharp." Harrison positioned his wheelchair next to her chair. "I want to show you something." He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small velvet box. "Open it." Victoria took the box. Inside was a ring. A simple gold band with a single diamond, smaller than anything Eleanor Whitmore would wear, but infinitely more precious. "This was your grandmother's engagement ring," Harrison said. "She wore it for 53 years. When she died, she made me promise to give it to you on your wedding day." He paused. "I'm sorry I missed that day." "Grandpa?" "I know your marriage to Marcus wasn't real. Not in the ways that matter. But tomorrow, when you walk into that courtroom, I want you to wear this ring." "Why?" "Because your grandmother was the strongest woman I ever knew. She faced down business rivals, hostile boardrooms, and even the United States government when they tried to investigate our taxes in 1987. Harrison's eyes twinkled. "She won every time. I want you to carry a piece of her with you tomorrow." Victoria slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Thank you, Grandpa." "Thank me after you win." Harrison reached out and squeezed her hand. "Now get some sleep. You have a war to wage in the morning." Victoria kissed his forehead.
"I love you."
"I love you too, sweetheart. More than you will ever know." Tuesday morning dawned gray and overcast. Victoria stood in front of the mirror in her grandfather's penthouse, examining her reflection. She wore a faded gray cardigan, 2 sizes too big. Her hair was pulled back in a messy, low bun. She had applied makeup specifically designed to make her look tired and pale. She carried a battered tote bag filled with messy papers. She looked exactly like what Marcus expected to see. A broken, penniless woman with no hope and no resources. "Showtime," she whispered. Arthur drove her to the courthouse in an unmarked sedan. He dropped her off 2 blocks away so no one would see the car. "Are you ready, Miss Victoria?" "I've been ready for 4 years." "The team is standing by. When you give the signal, they'll enter the courtroom." "I know the plan, Arthur." "I know you do, but I need to say something." Arthur turned to face her, his weathered face serious. "I watched you grow up. I taught you to ride horses and shoot guns and throw a punch. When you disappeared, I spent 12 years tracking every lead, following every rumor, hoping every day that I would find you. Arthur, I never stopped believing you would come home, and I never doubted that you would become exactly who you were meant to be." He smiled, and for the first time, Victoria saw tears in his eyes. "Today, you make your father proud. You make your grandfather proud. And you make me proud." Victoria hugged him tight. "Thank you for never giving up on me." "Never. Now go in there and destroy them." Victoria walked the last 2 blocks to the courthouse alone. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, playing the role of a defeated woman heading to her doom. When she entered the building, she saw the Whitmores immediately. Marcus stood near the security checkpoint, adjusting his silk tie. He looked like a man who had already won. Beside him, Eleanor wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. And flanking them was their lawyer, Gerald Price, a man known in legal circles as the executioner, for his brutal approach to divorce cases. Marcus spotted Victoria. His lip curled in contempt. "Look at her," he said, loudly enough for the whole lobby to hear. "She looks like she slept in a dumpster." Eleanor laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "I told you she'd show up. These gold diggers always think they have a chance." Victoria kept her head down. She shuffled past them toward the courtroom, clutching her tote bag like a lifeline. "Don't worry, darling," Marcus called after her. "This will be quick. You'll be back on the street where you belong by lunch." Victoria said nothing. Inside courtroom 4B, she took her seat at the defendant's table, alone. No lawyer, no support, just a woman in a cheap cardigan facing $3 billion worth of legal firepower. Gerald Price sat down at the plaintiff's table, spreading out his papers with the confidence of a man who had never lost a case. Marcus and Eleanor sat in the gallery behind him, whispering and smirking. The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Morrison." Victoria stood with everyone else, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. Judge Morrison entered and took his seat. He was an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He glanced at Victoria, and for a split second, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Understanding. Then it was gone. "Be seated," Morrison said. "Docket number 7834, Whitmore versus Whitmore. Mr. Price, you may begin." Gerald Price stood, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. My client, Marcus Whitmore, wishes to dissolve his marriage to the defendant. The parties have a prenuptial agreement that clearly stipulates the defendant receives nothing in the event of divorce. We ask that the prenup be enforced immediately." Judge Morrison looked at Victoria over his spectacles. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you have legal representation?" Victoria stood slowly, her hands visibly trembling. "No, Your Honor," she said in a small, shaky voice. "I couldn't afford a lawyer." Price smirked at Marcus. This was going exactly as planned. "Very well," Judge Morrison said. "Do you contest the divorce?" "No, Your Honor. I don't contest the divorce." "Then why are we here?" Victoria clutched her tote bag. "Because they said I stole from them. They called me a thief. I just want my name cleared." "Your Honor," Price said, rolling his eyes, "this is a waste of the court's time. The defendant has no assets, no income, and no case. I move for summary judgment." "Not so fast, Mr. Price." Judge Morrison held up his hand. "The defendant has raised an accusation of defamation. I'd like to hear more. Mrs. Whitmore, what exactly are you claiming?" Victoria pointed a shaking finger at Eleanor. "She said I stole silverware. She said I was a thief and a gold digger. She made security search my bags, but I never took anything that wasn't mine. I just want the truth to come out." Price sighed heavily. "Your Honor, if it will expedite matters, we can call Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore to testify regarding the defendant's conduct. It supports our position that she violated the good faith clause of the prenup." "Proceed." Eleanor rose gracefully and walked to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible with the confidence of a woman who believed her own lies. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Price approached the witness box. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" Eleanor sighed dramatically. "I tried to welcome her into our family. I truly did. But from the beginning, she showed her true colors. She was manipulative, dishonest, and constantly trying to extract money from my son." "Can you give specific examples?" "She demanded designer clothes. She insisted on expensive vacations. And when my son finally had enough and asked for a divorce, she threatened to go to the press with false accusations." Victoria watched from her table, her hand moving across a yellow legal pad. To the Whitmores, she looked like a madwoman scribbling nonsense. In reality, she was documenting every single lie. "And the silverware?" Price prompted. "We discovered several items missing after she left. A silver tea set that belonged to my grandmother. Antique candlesticks worth thousands of dollars. We believe she took them to sell." "Did you file a police report?" Eleanor hesitated for just a moment. We chose not to involve the authorities. We didn't want to embarrass the family." "Very generous of you. No further questions." Price returned to his seat with a satisfied expression. Judge Morrison looked at Victoria. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" Victoria stood. She didn't approach the podium. She stayed behind her table, still clutching her cardigan around herself. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you said I have no family. Is that true?" Eleanor smiled coldly. "To my knowledge, yes. You told us your parents died when you were young, and you had no living relatives." "And you're certain of that?" "Quite certain. You're a nobody from nowhere. That's why my son took pity on you in the first place. And you swear under oath that the Whitmore fortune is the only wealth involved in this marriage?" Eleanor laughed. "The Whitmore family is one of the most prominent in New York society. Compared to us, you are less than nothing." Victoria nodded slowly. She sat back down. "No further questions." Price stood immediately. "Your Honor, the plaintiff moves for immediate summary judgment. The defendant is clearly incompetent and has presented no evidence to counter our claims. We ask that she be ordered to pay legal fees for wasting the court's time." Judge Morrison reached for his gavel. Victoria's hand stopped trembling. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was different now, stronger, clearer. The tremor was gone. "I have one motion to submit." Everyone in the courtroom turned to look at her. Victoria stood up slowly. She shrugged off the oversized cardigan, letting it fall to the floor. Underneath, she wore a tailored white silk blouse that fit her perfectly. "I would like to submit a motion for full financial discovery regarding the Whitmore holdings," she said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "Specifically, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama that were not listed in the initial divorce filing." Marcus's smile vanished. "And," Victoria continued, reaching into her tote bag, "I would like to submit a motion to amend the name of the defendant on all court documents." She pulled out a blue folder with a gold wax seal. "Amended to what?" Judge Morrison asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew. Victoria walked toward the bench. Her stride was confident now, her shoulders back, her head high. "My name is not Victoria Hayes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Hayes was my mother's maiden name. I used it to protect myself from people like the Whitmores." She handed the folder to the judge. "My name," she said, turning to face Marcus and Eleanor, "is Victoria Adelaide Thornton." The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Morrison's hands trembled as he opened the blue folder. His eyes scanned the birth certificate, then the trust fund verification attached to it. The color drained from his face so quickly that Victoria thought he might faint. He looked up at her, then down at the documents, then back at her again. "Thornton," he whispered. "As in Harrison Thornton?" "My grandfather," Victoria said calmly. At the plaintiff's table, Eleanor Whitmore made a sound like a wounded animal. Her hand shot out and grabbed Marcus's arm so hard that her manicured nails tore through his suit jacket. "Mother, what is it?" Marcus hissed, confused. "Who is Thornton? Why do you look like that?" "Shut up," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with genuine terror. "Shut up, you stupid, stupid boy." Gerald Price stood frozen at his table, his mouth hanging open. The confident executioner of moments ago had been replaced by a man who looked like he'd just seen his own death warrant. "Your Honor," Price stammered, "we request a recess." "Denied." Victoria's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "The witness is still under oath."
"I have more questions." Judge Morrison set down the documents. His hands were shaking badly now. Miss Thornton, I had no idea. If I had known, ignorance of the law is no excuse, Your Honor," Victoria said. "You were about to grant summary judgment based on perjured testimony. Eleanor Whitmore just stated under oath that I have no assets. That is demonstrably false." "I didn't know," Eleanor shrieked from the witness stand. "How was I supposed to know? She told us she was a florist." "Mrs. Whitmore, you will control yourself," Judge Morrison snapped, but there was no authority in his voice anymore. He was a man caught between two powers, and he had clearly chosen the wrong side. Victoria turned to face Eleanor. The older woman sat rigid in the witness chair, her face the color of old paper. For the first time since Victoria had known her, Eleanor Whitmore looked afraid. "You testified under oath that I have no family," Victoria said, walking slowly toward the witness stand. "That was a lie. I didn't know. You testified under oath that I stole silverware from your home. You claimed there were missing items worth thousands of dollars. There were missing items. Then produce the police report." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "You didn't file a police report, did you, Eleanor?" Victoria stopped directly in front of the witness stand. "Because nothing was missing. You made up the theft accusation to justify throwing me out in the rain with nothing but a garbage bag." "That's not true." "So you did file a police report." Eleanor's eyes darted to Gerald Price, desperately seeking help. But Price was staring at his shoes, clearly calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster. "We didn't want to involve the authorities," Eleanor finally said. "Because there was no theft. Because you lied, under oath, in a federal courtroom." Victoria turned to Judge Morrison. "Your Honor, I move to have Eleanor Whitmore charged with perjury." "Now wait just a minute," Marcus shouted, jumping to his feet. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and make accusations. I don't care who your grandfather is." "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore," Judge Morrison commanded. "I will not sit down. This woman is my wife. She signed a prenup. She has no right to any of my money, regardless of who her family is." Victoria smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Actually, Marcus, I think you'll find that everything has changed." The doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Heads turned. Marcus spun around in his seat. Walking in were 6 people in matching dark suits. They moved in formation, like a flock of predatory birds descending on wounded prey. At the front was Jessica Thorne, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes cold as ice. They marched past the stunned security guard, past the open-mouthed spectators in the gallery, and lined up behind Victoria. Jessica placed a thick stack of documents on the defendant's table. "Jessica Thorne," she announced, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "Senior partner at Thornton Vance & Associates. I am entering my appearance as co-counsel for the defendant, Victoria Adelaide Thornton." "Co-counsel?" Price found his voice. "She said she was representing herself." "I am representing myself," Victoria said. "These attorneys are here to assist with paperwork. I passed the bar exam 3 years ago in New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Top 2% in all 3 states. Marcus let out a strangled laugh. "That's impossible. You spent every night watching television while I was working." "Is that what you thought I was doing?" Victoria tilted her head. "Interesting. I thought you were out working too. Turns out we were both wrong about what the other was doing at night." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about Amber, and Jennifer, and that 22-year-old hostess from the steakhouse on Madison Avenue." Victoria's voice hardened. I know about all of them, Marcus. I've known for years. Marcus's face went pale. We are filing a countersuit immediately, Jessica announced. Against Marcus Whitmore for fraud, perjury, tax evasion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Against Eleanor Whitmore for perjury, defamation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Countersuit? Marcus stammered. On what grounds? Victoria reached into the stack of documents Jessica had placed on the table. She pulled out a USB drive and held it up for everyone to see. 4 years of audio recordings made inside the Whitmore residence. New York is a one-party consent state, and I consented. That's illegal, Marcus shouted. You can't record me in my own home. Actually, I can. And I did. Every conversation, every phone call, every late-night meeting with your business partners where you discussed hiding assets from the IRS. Victoria handed the USB drive to the court clerk. This drive contains evidence of systematic tax fraud, including offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, totaling approximately $47 million that were not declared on your federal tax returns. Eleanor let out a moan from the witness stand. Her hand clutched her chest. It also contains, Victoria continued, recordings of verbal abuse directed at household staff, recordings of Marcus discussing bribes to city officials, and recordings of Eleanor admitting she knew about her son's affairs and helped cover them up. This is entrapment, Price finally interjected. Your Honor, this evidence was obtained through deception. My clients had a reasonable expectation of privacy. There is no expectation of privacy in a shared marital residence, Victoria replied coolly, especially when one party is actively committing crimes. The recordings are admissible under New York evidence law. Judge Morrison looked at the USB drive like it was a live grenade. Your Honor, Victoria said, in light of this new evidence, I move to freeze all Whitmore assets pending a forensic audit. Since my husband claimed poverty in his tax returns, but lives in a $35 million estate, I believe he is hiding income. And since I am technically still his wife, half of that hidden income is legally mine. Objection, Price shouted, but his voice cracked. On what grounds? Judge Morrison asked wearily. Price opened his mouth. No words came out. Motion granted, Judge Morrison said. All Whitmore assets are frozen effective immediately. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then Eleanor's phone buzzed. Then Price's. Marcus pulled out his phone, his face contorted with panic. My credit card was just declined, he said. My assistant is trying to book the company jet. What's happening? The jet isn't going anywhere, Marcus, Victoria said. I have a court order grounding all Whitmore-owned aircraft pending the asset investigation. You can't do this. I just did. Eleanor stumbled down from the witness stand, her legs barely supporting her. She grabbed Marcus's arm for support. We need to leave, she whispered frantically. We need to get to the house, the safe, the diamonds. Mrs. Whitmore, you are still under oath, Judge Morrison warned. You may not leave this courtroom without the court's permission. I don't care about your permission, Eleanor snapped, some of her old venom returning. Do you know who I am? I am Eleanor Whitmore. My family has been in New York society for 5 generations. You cannot treat me like a common criminal. Eleanor, Victoria said softly. The older woman turned to face her. Do you know who holds the mortgage on your precious estate in Connecticut? Eleanor's face went blank. Thornton National Bank, Victoria said. We've held it for 15 years. My family has owned your home longer than you've lived in it. Eleanor's knees buckled. Marcus caught her before she hit the floor. And do you know who the largest institutional investor in Whitmore Industries is? Marcus looked up, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Thornton Capital owns 18% of your company, Victoria said. We've been quietly buying shares for the past decade through various shell companies.
We are your largest shareholder outside of your own family."
"That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "I would have known. The board would have told me." "The board doesn't know either. The shares are held through offshore entities, layers upon layers of legal structures specifically designed to remain invisible." Victoria smiled. "You've been dancing in the palm of my family's hand for years, Marcus. You just didn't know it." Marcus stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Who are you?" "I told you on our wedding day. You just weren't listening." Victoria walked closer to him. "I am Victoria Adelaide Thornton. My grandfather is Harrison Thornton, founder of Thornton Bank, Thornton Capital, and Thornton Holdings. My family's combined net worth is approximately $47 billion. She stopped directly in front of her husband. "I could have bought your company with my monthly allowance, Marcus. I could have purchased your entire family's legacy without touching my trust fund." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I didn't want your money. I wanted your love. And when I realized you had none to give, I settled for your destruction." Marcus's face crumpled. For the first time since Victoria had known him, he looked genuinely terrified. "Samantha, please," he said, using her old name. "We can work this out. I made mistakes. I know that. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "My name is not Samantha. It was never Samantha." Victoria's voice was ice. "And there is nothing to fix. You threw me out with a garbage bag. Your mother stepped on my father's photograph and ground her heel into his face." She turned to face Eleanor, who was leaning heavily on a courtroom bench. "Do you remember what you said when you did that, Eleanor? Do you remember what you called my father?" Eleanor said nothing. Her lips were pressed together in a thin, white line. "You called him a nobody," Victoria said. "You said the photograph was worthless. Just like me. I didn't know who he was." "Alexander Thornton," Victoria said. "My father's name was Alexander Thornton. He was Harrison Thornton's only son. He was the heir to one of the largest fortunes in American history, and he died in a car accident when I was 10 years old, along with my mother." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. "That photograph you destroyed was the last image I have of my father before he died. It was taken 3 days before the accident. He was smiling because my mother had just told him she was pregnant again. He was going to have another child. He was so happy." Victoria's voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "The pregnancy didn't survive the accident. Neither did my parents. I was the only one who walked away. And I spent the next 20 years trying to forget who I was, because the pain of being a Thornton without my father was too much to bear." She turned back to Marcus. "I ran away from my family. I changed my name. I became a florist in Vermont because I wanted a simple life. And when you walked into my shop with your broken-down car and your charming smile, I thought I had finally found someone who could love me for who I was, not what I was worth." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I signed your prenup because I wanted to prove that I wasn't after your money. I wanted you to see me, the real me, without the billions of dollars clouding your vision." Victoria shook her head slowly. "But you never saw me. You only saw a servant, a trophy, a woman you could control." "Victoria." "4 years," she continued. "I gave you 4 years of my life. I nursed you when you were sick. I managed your household. I tolerated your affairs and your cruelty and the way you looked through me like I was made of glass. And through it all, I kept hoping that somewhere inside you there was a good man waiting to emerge." She stepped back. "I was wrong. There is no good man inside you, Marcus. There's only greed and ego and a bottomless need to dominate everyone around you." "I can change," Marcus pleaded. "Give me another chance. I'll be different. I'll be better." "You had 4 years of chances. You had 1,000 opportunities to be a decent human being." Victoria's voice hardened. Instead, you threw me out into a storm with nothing but a garbage bag. You let your mother destroy my father's photograph. You laughed while I walked into the rain. She turned to Jessica.
File the papers. Jessica nodded and handed a thick document to the court clerk. Your Honor, we are submitting a petition for emergency divorce on grounds of fraud, abuse, and moral turpitude. We are also filing criminal referrals to the IRS, the SEC, and the FBI regarding the financial irregularities uncovered in our investigation. FBI? Price looked like he might collapse. Now, wait just a minute. We can negotiate. There's no need to involve federal authorities.
There is every need, Victoria said. Your clients committed crimes. They will face consequences. Victoria, please, Marcus tried again. Think about what you're doing. If you destroy me, you destroy yourself too. We're still married. My debts are your debts. Victoria laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Your debts are secured by assets that are about to be seized by the federal government. My assets are protected by trust structures that have been in place since before you were born. She leaned in close. When this is over, Marcus, you will have nothing, and I will have everything. You can't take my company. Watch me. The board will never allow it. The board will do what it's told. When they find out that the Thornton family owns 18% of Whitmore Industries, they'll be falling over themselves to cooperate. Victoria straightened up. And when they find out that the Thornton family also owns the bank holding your corporate loans, they'll realize they never had a choice in the first place. Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest chair. His face was gray. His hands were shaking. "How long?" he whispered. "How long have you been planning this?" Victoria considered the question. "I didn't plan it, Marcus. Not at first. When I married you, I genuinely believed we could be happy together. I believed that love could conquer the differences between us." She paused. "But then I found the divorce papers in your briefcase 3 weeks ago. I saw the notes from your lawyer about how to maximize my humiliation. I read the text messages between you and Amber, planning your new life together." Marcus flinched. "That's when I stopped hoping and started preparing. That's when I called my family for the first time in 12 years. That's when I became Victoria Thornton again." She walked toward the courtroom doors, her legal team falling into formation behind her. "Your Honor, I believe we're done here for today. My attorneys will file the necessary paperwork for the asset freeze and the criminal referrals. I'll see you at the next hearing." "Wait," Judge Morrison called out. "Miss Thornton, when should we schedule the continuation?" Victoria paused at the door. She looked back at Marcus, who sat slumped in his chair, and at Eleanor, who had collapsed onto a bench with her head in her hands. "Whenever is convenient for the court, Your Honor. I'm in no hurry," she smiled. "I've waited 4 years for this. I can wait a little longer to watch it play out." She pushed through the doors and walked into the hallway. The press was already there. Somehow, word had gotten out. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust toward her face. A dozen voices shouted questions at once. "Mrs. Whitmore! Mrs. Whitmore! Is it true you're a Thornton?" Victoria stopped in the middle of the chaos. She looked directly into the nearest camera, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Please," she said, "call me Miss Thornton. Mrs. Whitmore no longer exists." She walked through the crowd without another word, Arthur appearing at her side to escort her to the waiting car. Behind her, she could hear the courtroom doors opening, could hear Marcus's desperate voice calling her name. She didn't look back. The war had only just begun, but the first battle was won, and Victoria Thornton intended to win them all. The black sedan cut through Manhattan traffic while Victoria sat in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap. Arthur drove in silence, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. The adrenaline that had carried her through the courtroom was fading now, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jessica Thorne. News already breaking. Every major outlet running the story. Whitmore stock down 23% in after-hours trading. Victoria stared at the message. 23%. Millions of dollars evaporating in minutes. And this was only the beginning. "Miss Victoria," Arthur said from the front seat, "your grandfather is asking if you'll come directly to the tower." He watched the hearing on the courthouse feed. How did he look? Like a man who just watched his granddaughter conquer an army. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. "Tell him I'm on my way." The Thornton Tower lobby was chaos when she arrived. Staff members who hadn't seen her in 12 years stopped and stared. Some of them had known her as a child, had watched her run through these halls, had bought her ice cream from the cafe on the corner. Now they watched her walk toward the private elevator with the bearing of a queen. Harrison was waiting in his office on the top floor. The room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he had helped build. But Victoria's eyes went straight to her grandfather, who sat in his wheelchair behind a desk the size of a small car. "Grandpa, come here, child." She crossed the room and knelt beside his wheelchair. Harrison reached out with trembling hands and cupped her face. "I watched the whole thing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every word, every moment. When you revealed your name and that woman's face went white, I thought my heart would give out from pure joy. I couldn't have done it without you, without the legal team, without all of this." Nonsense. Harrison's eyes were fierce. The lawyers filed papers. The investigators gathered evidence. But you, Victoria, you stood in that courtroom alone. You faced down those monsters with nothing but your wits and your courage. That was all you. Victoria's phone buzzed again. Then again. Then it didn't stop buzzing. "The vultures are circling," Harrison said with satisfaction. "Every news outlet in the country wants a comment. Every business reporter wants to know what happens next." What does happen next? Harrison smiled his predatory smile. "Now, we finish what you started." Theodore entered the office carrying a tablet. His face was grim but satisfied. "The asset freeze is in effect," he reported. "Marcus tried to withdraw funds from 6 different accounts in the past hour. All blocked. Eleanor attempted to access her safety deposit box at Chase Manhattan. Denied. Their credit cards are worthless. Their bank accounts are locked. They can't even buy a cup of coffee. Where are they now? Last report, they were still at the courthouse arguing with their lawyer. Price is trying to file an emergency motion to unfreeze some assets for basic living expenses." Theodore's lip curled. "The motion will be denied. Judge Morrison is too scared to do anything that might upset us." Victoria stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, millions of lights glittering in the darkness. "I don't want to just freeze their assets," she said quietly. "I want to take everything." "And you will," Harrison assured her. "But these things take time. The legal process must be followed. Even we can't simply seize a man's company overnight." "Actually," Theodore said, looking at his tablet, "we might be able to accelerate the timeline significantly." "How?" "Marcus leveraged his Whitmore Industries shares 3 years ago to cover losses in the Asian markets. He used them as collateral for a loan from a company called Chimera Capital." Victoria turned around. "I remember. You mentioned that at the War Council." "What I didn't mention is that the loan comes due in 72 hours. It was a bridge loan, meant to be refinanced, but with the asset freeze in place, Marcus can't refinance. And if he can't pay, Chimera seizes the collateral," Victoria finished. "His shares in his own company." "Exactly." Harrison wheeled himself closer. "And who owns Chimera Capital, Theodore?" Theodore smiled. "We do. Through a network of offshore entities that would take forensic accountants years to unravel." Victoria stared at her uncle.
You're telling me that we loaned Marcus the money 3 years ago? That we've been holding his company hostage this entire time without him knowing? Your grandfather's idea, Theodore said. He's been playing chess while the Whitmores were playing checkers. Victoria turned to Harrison. You planned this 3 years ago? I planned for every contingency, Harrison said. When you married that boy, I knew it would end badly. I started buying positions in his company, his debt, his real estate. I wanted to be ready when you needed me. His voice softened. I never stopped believing you would come home, Victoria. And I never stopped preparing for the day when you would need to destroy the people who hurt you. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Grandpa. Don't thank me yet. We still have work to do. Harrison's expression hardened. Call the board meeting. 2 days later, Victoria walked into the Whitmore Industries boardroom. She had spent the intervening time preparing, strategizing, and watching Marcus's world crumble in real time. The news coverage had been relentless. Every outlet was running the story of the secret heiress, the brutal prenup, the courtroom revelation. Public opinion had turned violently against the Whitmores, but the real damage was happening behind the scenes. Whitmore Industries stock had lost 40% of its value. Major clients were canceling contracts. Business partners were distancing themselves. The company that Marcus had inherited from his father was bleeding out, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Now Victoria stood at the head of the boardroom table, flanked by Jessica Thorne and 2 other Thornton attorneys. 12 board members sat around the oval table, their faces ranging from terrified to resigned. And at the far end of the table sat Marcus Whitmore. He looked terrible. 2 days without access to his money had stripped away the veneer of wealth and power. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't shaved. Thank you all for coming, Victoria said, her voice calm and professional. I'll keep this brief. You have no right to be here, Marcus spat. This is my company, my boardroom. Actually, it isn't. Not anymore. Victoria nodded to Jessica, who distributed folders to each board member. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Chimera Capital called in the loan you took out 3 years ago. Since you were unable to pay, your 40% stake in Whitmore Industries has been seized as collateral. Marcus's face went gray. That's impossible. I have 30 days to refinance. You had 30 days. The grace period expired this morning. You missed the deadline because your assets were frozen and you couldn't access the funds. Victoria smiled coldly. Unfortunate timing. Who owns Chimera Capital? One of the board members asked nervously. I do, Victoria said, through a subsidiary of Thornton Holdings. The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus slammed his fist on the table. This is fraud. This is conspiracy. I'll sue you for everything you have. With what money? Victoria asked. With what lawyers? Your legal team resigned this morning. Apparently, they don't want to be associated with a man facing federal tax fraud charges. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. Furthermore, Victoria continued, Thornton Capital has been quietly acquiring shares in Whitmore Industries for the past decade. Combined with the shares we just seized from you, we now control 58% of this company. Controlling interest, Jessica confirmed. We are now the majority shareholder. Marcus looked around the table desperately. This can't be legal. Someone do something. Stop her. The board members avoided his gaze. They knew which way the wind was blowing. I move, Victoria said, to remove Marcus Whitmore as CEO of Whitmore Industries, effective immediately. Grounds include gross negligence, moral turpitude, and conduct unbecoming of a corporate officer. Seconded, said the chairman of the board, a gray-haired man who had been Marcus's father's best friend. All in favor? 12 hands rose into the air. Motion carried. Victoria turned to face her husband. Marcus, you're fired. Security will escort you out of the building. "You can't do this to me," Marcus screamed, jumping to his feet. "I built this company. This is my legacy, my father's legacy." "Your father built this company," Victoria corrected him. "You inherited it and drove it into the ground with bad investments and fraudulent accounting. I'm doing the shareholders a favor by removing you before you can do any more damage." Two security guards appeared at the boardroom door. Marcus looked at them, then back at Victoria, his face contorted with rage and despair. "I'll destroy you," he hissed. "I don't care how rich your family is. I'll find a way. I'll make you pay for this." "You already paid, Marcus. You paid the moment you decided to treat another human being like garbage." Victoria sat down in the chair at the head of the table. His chair. "Now get out of my building." The security guards took Marcus by the arms. He struggled briefly, then went limp, all the fight draining out of him. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked back at Victoria one last time. "I loved you," he said, his voice cracking. "In my own way, I did love you." Victoria felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a hollow emptiness where her feelings for this man used to live. "No, you didn't," she said quietly. "You loved having power over me. That's not the same thing." The doors closed behind him. Victoria turned to the board members, who sat in stunned silence. "Gentlemen, ladies, we have a lot of work to do. This company is hemorrhaging money and credibility. We need to stabilize operations, reassure clients, and begin the process of restructuring." She paused. "But first, I have one more piece of business to address." "What business?" the chairman asked nervously. "I'm liquidating the company." The room exploded in protests. "You can't be serious," the chairman sputtered. "Whitmore Industries is worth billions." "It was worth billions," Victoria corrected, "before the stock collapse and the fraud revelations. Now it's worth considerably less, and it's going to keep dropping as the legal troubles mount." She stood up and walked to the window. "I'm not interested in running Marcus's company. I'm interested in dismantling it." "But the employees," another board member protested. "Thousands of people will lose their jobs." "No, they won't." Victoria turned back to face them. "We're going to sell the company in pieces. Each division will be acquired by a larger firm with better resources and management. The employees will keep their jobs. Many of them will get better jobs, with better benefits and better leadership. And the proceeds from the sale will go to the shareholders after the debts are paid and the legal settlements are finalized." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "I'm also establishing a fund for the household staff who were mistreated during Marcus's tenure. Every maid, gardener, and security guard who worked at the Whitmore estate will receive a pension and a severance package." "That will cost millions," the chairman protested. "I don't care about the cost. I care about justice." The boardroom fell silent. "Are there any objections?" Victoria asked. No one spoke. "Good. Then let's get to work." 3 hours later, Victoria sat alone in the empty boardroom. The board members had left, shell-shocked and compliant. The lawyers had gone to file the necessary paperwork. Even Jessica had stepped out to make phone calls. Victoria's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Please, I'm begging you." It was Marcus. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the delete button. Then, against her better judgment, she typed a response. "Where are you?" "The diner on 47th Street, the one where we had our first date in the city." Victoria remembered that night. Marcus had been charming and attentive, ordering her favorite wine without being asked, listening to her stories about the flower shop with what seemed like genuine interest. She had believed, then, that she had found someone special. How wrong she had been. "I'll give you 10 minutes, she typed back. The diner was nearly empty when Victoria walked in.
Marcus sat in a booth at the back, hunched over a cup of coffee. He looked up when she approached, and his eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't think you would." "I almost didn't." Victoria slid into the booth across from him. "Say what you need to say." Marcus wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. His fingers were trembling. "I've lost everything," he said. "The company. The house. My mother is staying with friends because she has nowhere else to go. I had to borrow $20 from a stranger to buy this coffee. And I wanted to say I'm sorry." Victoria studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. She found only exhaustion and despair. "Sorry for what, exactly?" "For everything," Marcus's voice broke. "For the way I treated you. For the affairs. For letting my mother humiliate you. For throwing you out like you were nothing." "You did all of those things," Victoria agreed. "And more." I know I did." Tears spilled down Marcus's cheeks. "I was so convinced that I was better than you, that I was doing you a favor by marrying you. I couldn't see what was right in front of me." "What was right in front of you, Marcus?" "A good woman who loved me. A partner who would have stood by me through anything." He looked up at her with desperate eyes. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too arrogant to recognize it." Victoria felt something stir in her chest. Not love, not forgiveness, but something that might have been pity. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost. And I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally see who you are." "And who am I?" "Someone extraordinary." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Someone strong and brilliant and brave. Someone who deserved so much better than what I gave her." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Outside the diner windows, life went on. People walked by, absorbed in their own problems, unaware of the drama unfolding inside. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" she finally asked. "Truly, what do you want?" "I want—" He stopped, struggling to find the words. "I want a chance to make things right. Not to get you back. I know that's impossible. But to somehow, someday, do something good enough to deserve a second chance at being a decent human being. That's not something I can give you. That's something you have to earn on your own." "I know. I don't know where to start." Victoria reached into her purse. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "This is a job placement agency. They help people who are starting over. Call them tomorrow." Marcus looked at the card like it was a lifeline. "Why would you help me? After everything I did?" "Because holding on to hatred would only hurt me, and because destroying you was never the point." Victoria stood up. "Justice was the point. Making sure you understood the consequences of your actions. Making sure no one else had to suffer the way I did." "So this is it? This is goodbye?" "This is goodbye." Victoria looked down at the man she had once loved. "I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for, Marcus. But find it somewhere far away from me." She walked out of the diner without looking back. The news broke 3 days later. Whitmore Industries had been sold to a consortium of buyers, with each division going to a different acquiring company. The Whitmore name would cease to exist within the year. Eleanor Whitmore was arrested at a friend's home in Greenwich and charged with 5 counts of tax fraud and 2 counts of perjury. Her bail was set at $2 million. She couldn't pay it. Marcus disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated that he had taken a job at a small accounting firm in New Jersey, starting over from the bottom. Victoria didn't know if the rumors were true, and she didn't care to find out. The Whitmore estate in Connecticut was seized by federal authorities and put up for auction. The starting bid was $15 million. Victoria bought it for 16. She stood in the grand foyer where Eleanor had once ground her heel into her father's photograph. The house was empty now, stripped of its furniture and pretension, just walls and windows and ghosts. Arthur stood beside her, patient as always. "What will you do with it?" he asked. "Burn it down," Victoria said. Then she paused, reconsidering. "No, that would be wasteful and petty." "Then what?" Victoria walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing off the bare walls. She remembered every humiliation she had suffered here, every cruel word. Every night she had cried herself to sleep, while Marcus entertained his mistresses. But she also remembered the staff, the maids who had been kind to her when no one else was, the gardeners who had taught her about flowers, the security guards who had tried to protect her dignity, even as they were ordered to throw her out. "A shelter," Victoria said finally. "A home for women who have been thrown out with nothing. A place where they can rebuild their lives without fear or shame." Arthur smiled. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." Victoria touched the wall where her father's photograph had fallen. "I really hope so." Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandfather. "Come home. We have one more matter to discuss." Victoria frowned at the message. "Do you know what this is about?" "I have an idea," Arthur said, "but it's not my place to say." They drove back to Manhattan in silence. Victoria watched the Connecticut countryside roll by, thinking about everything that had happened. In less than a week, she had gone from a woman with nothing to a woman who had destroyed an empire. But victory felt hollow somehow. She had won, but what had she really gained? When she arrived at Thornton Tower, she found her grandfather waiting in his office. Theodore was there too, along with the entire legal team. "Sit down, Victoria," Harrison said. His voice was serious but not unkind.
What's going on?
"There's something you need to know, something I should have told you years ago, but I was waiting for the right moment." Victoria sat down, her heart suddenly racing. "You're scaring me, Grandpa." Harrison reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. He handed it to Victoria. It showed a young woman standing in front of a house Victoria recognized. The Whitmore estate.
Who is this?
Victoria asked, though something in her already knew the answer. "That is your mother," Harrison said, standing in front of her childhood home. Victoria stared at the photograph. Her mother, young and beautiful, with the same fierce eyes that Victoria saw in the mirror every day. "I don't understand." "The Whitmore estate was originally the Thornton summer home," Harrison said. "It belonged to our family for 3 generations. Your mother grew up in that house. She played on those floors. She dreamed her childhood dreams within those walls." Victoria's hands trembled. "What happened?" "Your mother fell in love with your father when she was 19. Alexander was a poor artist then, before he joined the family business. I disapproved of the match. I cut her off temporarily, thinking it would teach her a lesson." Harrison's voice grew heavy with old regret. "While I was in Europe on business, Eleanor Whitmore's father saw an opportunity. He used predatory lending practices to trick your mother into signing over the deed. By the time I returned, it was too late. The house was gone." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "Eleanor knew? She knew my mother?" "They went to high school together. Eleanor was always jealous of your mother's beauty and her family's wealth. When she had the chance to take something precious from her, she did it without hesitation." "That's why she stepped on the photograph," Victoria whispered. "She recognized my father. She knew exactly whose son she was disrespecting." "Yes." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Eleanor Whitmore has been carrying a 30-year grudge against our family. When you married her son, she must have thought it was the ultimate victory. A Thornton, serving as a Whitmore's maid. Victoria stood up abruptly. Her legs felt weak, but her rage gave her strength. She knew the whole time. She knew who I was, and she still treated me like garbage.
I don't believe she knew who you were specifically, but she suspected. That's why she worked so hard to humiliate you. That's why she stepped on your father's photograph. Harrison reached out and took Victoria's hand. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to wait until after the trial. Victoria looked at the photograph in her hand. Her mother's face smiled back at her, young and full of hope, standing in front of a home that would be stolen from her.
The shelter, Victoria said slowly. The one I'm building in the Whitmore estate. Yes? I'm naming it after my mother. Harrison's eyes glistened with tears. She would have liked that. Victoria looked out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Eleanor Whitmore sat in a jail cell, stripped of everything she had ever valued. And somewhere else, Marcus Whitmore was learning what it meant to start over with nothing. Justice had been served. The Thornton legacy had been restored. And Victoria Adelaide Thornton had finally become exactly who she was meant to be. But the story wasn't quite over yet. 6 months had passed since the courtroom revelation that shook New York society to its core. Victoria stood at the window of her grandfather's office, watching the sunset over Manhattan. The city spread beneath her like a tapestry of light and shadow, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to comprehend. Behind her, Harrison Thornton sat in his wheelchair, thinner now than he had been 6 months ago. The doctor said he had weeks left, maybe days. But his eyes still burned with a fierce intelligence that had built an empire. You're thinking too loud, Harrison said. I can hear it from here. Victoria smiled without turning around. I'm thinking about Mom. What about her? I wish she could have seen this. The shelter, the foundation, everything we've built. She sees it, Harrison's voice was gentle. Wherever she is, she sees it. Victoria turned to face her grandfather. He looked so fragile now, so different from the giant she remembered from her childhood. But his spirit was undiminished. The ribbon cutting is tomorrow, she said. The Margaret Thornton Women's Shelter, named after my mother. I know. I planned to be there. Grandpa, the doctor said... I know what the doctor said. Harrison's jaw set stubbornly. They said I shouldn't have gotten out of bed the night you came home. They said I shouldn't have attended the board meeting. They said I shouldn't still be alive. He smiled. I've never been good at following instructions. Victoria knelt beside his wheelchair and took his hand. His skin was paper thin, the bones visible beneath. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. For never giving up on me. For preparing for the day when I would need you. For loving me even when I ran away. You are my granddaughter. Loving you was never a choice. It was simply who I am. I wasted so many years. No, Harrison squeezed her hand with surprising strength. You lived. You experienced the world outside these walls. You learned what it means to be ordinary, to struggle, to love someone who doesn't deserve you. Those years made you who you are today. And who am I today? Harrison looked at her with eyes full of pride. You are Victoria Adelaide Thornton. You are my legacy, and you are going to change the world. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect October day, with crisp air and golden sunlight. The former Whitmore estate had been transformed. Gone were the pretentious sculptures and manicured hedges. In their place stood gardens designed for meditation and healing, walking paths lined with benches, and a playground for children. The main house had been renovated from top to bottom. What had once been a monument to wealth and ego was now a haven for women in crisis. 40 private rooms, a medical clinic, a legal aid office, job training facilities, and a childcare center. Victoria had spared no expense. A crowd had gathered for the ribbon cutting. Press, politicians, philanthropists, and most importantly, the women who would call this place home. They stood in the courtyard, their faces a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Victoria stepped up to the podium. She wore a simple black dress, her mother's ring on her finger, her father's photograph tucked in her pocket. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "6 months ago, I stood on this very ground as a different person. I was Victoria Hayes then, a woman with no family, no resources, and no hope. I was thrown out of this house with nothing but a garbage bag and told I was worthless." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "But I wasn't worthless, and neither are any of you." Victoria looked at the women gathered before her. "Every woman in this crowd has a story. Some of you escaped abusive marriages. Some of you lost everything to addiction or illness. Some of you were simply unlucky, caught in circumstances beyond your control." She paused, her eyes sweeping the faces before her. "Society tells us that our worth is measured by our bank accounts, our addresses, our husbands' names. Society tells us that women who end up with nothing must have done something to deserve it. Society is wrong." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "This shelter exists to prove that every woman has value, regardless of her circumstances. This shelter exists to provide safety, resources, and hope to those who have been told they deserve none. And this shelter is named after my mother, Margaret Thornton, a woman who taught me that true strength isn't about power or money. It's about getting back up when life knocks you down." Victoria gestured to the building behind her. "My mother grew up in this house. It was stolen from her through deception and greed. For 30 years, it served as a monument to cruelty and arrogance. But today, we reclaim it. Today, this house becomes what it always should have been: a home, a sanctuary, a place where women are lifted up instead of torn down." She picked up the ceremonial scissors. "I dedicate this shelter to every woman who has ever been told she was nothing. You are not nothing. You are everything. And you deserve better." Victoria cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. As the ceremony concluded and guests began touring the facility, Victoria slipped away from the crowd. She walked through the house, past the volunteers and staff members preparing for the first residents, until she reached a small room at the back of the building. It was the room where Eleanor Whitmore had stepped on her father's photograph. Victoria stood in the doorway, remembering the humiliation, the rage, the helplessness. She had felt so small that night, so powerless. "Miss Thornton?" Victoria turned. A young woman stood behind her, barely 20 years old, with dark circles under her eyes and a baby on her hip. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said. "I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For this place, for giving us somewhere to go." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My husband threw me out last month. He said I was worthless. He said no one would ever want me. I believed him." Victoria's heart clenched. "What's your name?" "Sarah." "Sarah, listen to me." Victoria stepped closer and looked the young woman directly in the eyes. "Your husband was wrong. You are not worthless. You are a mother. You are a survivor. And you are going to rebuild your life and prove everyone wrong." "How do you know?" "Because I did it." Victoria touched the young woman's shoulder. 6 months ago, I was standing in the rain with nothing but a garbage bag, listening to people tell me I was nothing. Now I'm standing here, having taken everything from the people who hurt me. If I can do it, so can you." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Were you scared?" terrified every single day. But I learned something important. What? Fear doesn't mean you're weak. Fear means you're about to do something brave. Sarah nodded slowly. The baby on her hip cooed and reached for Victoria's hair. "Can I ask you something else?" Sarah said. "Anything. The man who threw you out, the one you destroyed. Do you ever regret it? Do you ever wish you had just walked away?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. But not because revenge felt good. It didn't, actually. Destroying Marcus and Eleanor didn't bring my parents back. It didn't erase the years of humiliation. It didn't fill the emptiness inside me. Then why don't you regret it? Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making sure they could never hurt anyone else the way they hurt me. And it was about proving to myself that I wasn't the weak, worthless woman they told me I was." Sarah bounced her baby gently. "What happened to them? The people who hurt you?" "Eleanor Whitmore is serving 7 years in federal prison for tax fraud and perjury. She'll be almost 70 when she gets out. Her society friends have abandoned her. Her name has become a punchline." "And the husband?" Victoria paused. She thought about the last time she had seen Marcus, broken and crying in that diner, begging for a chance to redeem himself. "Marcus is working as a clerk at a small accounting firm in New Jersey. He lives in a studio apartment and takes the bus to work. Last I heard, he's attending therapy and trying to understand why he became the person he was." "Do you think he'll ever change?" "I don't know, but it's not my job to fix him. It's my job to move forward and build something better." Sarah smiled for the first time since Victoria had met her. "You're pretty amazing, you know that?" "I'm not amazing. I'm just someone who refused to stay down when life knocked me over." Victoria squeezed her shoulder. "And soon, that's going to be you, too." That evening, Victoria returned to Thornton Tower. She found her grandfather in his office, sitting by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Arthur stood in the corner, his face grave. "How was the ceremony?" Harrison asked without turning around. "Perfect. The shelter is everything I hoped it would be." "Good. That's good." Harrison's voice was weaker than it had been that morning. "Come sit with me, Victoria." She pulled a chair beside him. His hand reached for hers, and she took it gently. "I'm tired, sweetheart," Harrison said. "More tired than I've ever been." "Then rest, Grandpa. You've earned it." "Not yet. There's one more thing I need to tell you." Victoria leaned closer. "What is it?" "When you ran away 12 years ago, I was angry, furious. I couldn't understand why you would abandon everything I had built, everything your father had died to protect." "I'm sorry, Grandpa, Let me finish." Harrison turned to face her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. "It took me years to understand, but eventually I did. You didn't run away from the Thornton legacy. You ran away because you needed to find out who you were without it." "I was scared of becoming someone I didn't want to be." "I know, and I should have seen that. I should have given you space to grow instead of trying to mold you into a copy of myself." Harrison's grip tightened on her hand. "But when you came home, when you walked into that courtroom and revealed who you truly were, I realized something." "What?" "You didn't become a copy of me. You became something better. You took everything I taught you about power and strategy and business, and you combined it with something I never had. Compassion. Mercy. The ability to destroy your enemies without losing your soul." Victoria felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. "Grandpa, I'm proud of you, Victoria. More proud than I've ever been of anything in my life. And I know that when I'm gone, the Thornton legacy will be in good hands." "Please don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. The doctors gave me 6 months to live, 12 months ago." Harrison smiled weakly. I stayed alive to see you come home. I stayed alive to watch you triumph. Now, it's time for me to rest. I'm not ready to lose you. You're not losing me. Victoria nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Good. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Now, will you stay with me for a while? I'd like to watch the city lights with my granddaughter. Victoria moved her chair closer and rested her head on his shoulder. They sat together in silence, watching Manhattan sparkle beneath them. Harrison Thornton died peacefully 3 days later, with Victoria holding his hand. The funeral was the largest New York had seen in decades. She cried for her grandfather, for her parents, for the 12 years she had wasted running from her own identity. She cried for the girl who had stood in the rain with a garbage bag, and for the woman who had emerged from the wreckage stronger than steel. When the tears finally stopped, Victoria felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, but so was something else. Determination, purpose, a clarity she had never experienced before. She picked up the phone and called Theodore. I need you to schedule a press conference, she said. Tomorrow morning. What for? I'm announcing the formation of the Thornton Foundation. We're going to fund shelters for women in every major city in America. We're going to provide legal aid to abuse survivors. We're going to change the way this country treats people who have been thrown away. Theodore was quiet for a moment. Harrison would be proud. I know. That's why I'm doing it. 1 year later, Victoria stood at the window of her office in Thornton Tower, watching the sun rise over Manhattan. So much had changed in the past 12 months. The Thornton Foundation had opened 15 shelters across the country, with 20 more in development. The legal aid program had helped over 3,000 women escape abusive situations. The job training initiative had placed hundreds of women in stable employment. Victoria had become a symbol of hope for survivors everywhere. Her story, a reminder of how far she had come. Her phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. Package arrived. Left it on your desk. Victoria looked down and saw a small cardboard box she hadn't noticed before. There was no return address, just her name written in familiar handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single flower, a white lily, perfectly preserved, and a note. Victoria, I've been working at a flower shop in Vermont. The owner is teaching me how to arrange bouquets. I think about you every time I touch a petal. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone better. Someone who might someday be worthy of the kindness you showed me in that diner. The flower shop is called Second Chances. I thought you might appreciate the irony. I'm sorry. For everything. Marcus. Victoria stared at the note for a long moment. She thought about throwing it away, about pretending she had never received it, but something stopped her. She picked up the lily and held it to the light. It was beautiful, delicate, perfect in its simplicity. She set it in a small vase on her windowsill, where it caught the morning sun. Then she sat down at her desk and got to work. The phone rang throughout the day. Meetings filled her calendar. Decisions needed to be made. Contracts needed to be signed. Lives needed to be changed. Victoria handled it all with grace and efficiency, the way her grandfather had taught her. At the end of the day, as the sun set once again over Manhattan, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the scared girl who had run away from home 12 years ago, desperate to escape the weight of her family name. She thought about the woman who had married Marcus Whitmore, believing that love could conquer all differences. She picked up her phone and called the shelter that bore her mother's name. This is Victoria Thornton. I'd like to speak with Sarah. A moment later, a familiar voice came on the line. Miss Thornton, is everything okay? Everything is fine, Sarah. I just wanted to check on you. How are the job interviews going? I got the position. Sarah's voice was bright with joy. "I start Monday. And the daycare at the shelter agreed to watch Emma while I work."
I can't believe it's really happening.
"I can believe it. You're stronger than you know."
I learned that from you.
Victoria smiled. "No, Sarah. You learned it from yourself. I just reminded you it was there." After she hung up, Victoria stood at the window one last time. The city spread beneath her, beautiful and brutal, full of people struggling and fighting and hoping for better days. She thought about her grandfather's final words. Build something. Help people. Find happiness.
Your grandfather would be proud. I know.
Victoria looked out the car window as Manhattan scrolled past.
He told me so.
The Whitmore name had been erased from history. Eleanor sat in a federal prison, abandoned by everyone who had once fawned over her. Marcus was learning to live as an ordinary person, stripped of the wealth and privilege that had corrupted him. But Victoria Adelaide Thornton was just getting started. She had proven that dignity cannot be destroyed by cruelty.
She had shown the world that true power lies not in wealth or status,
but in the courage to stand up after being knocked down. And she had demonstrated, beyond any doubt, that the quietest person in the room is often the one you should fear most. Victoria had been thrown out with nothing. She had been called worthless, pathetic, and forgettable. Now she owned everything her enemies had treasured, and she used it to build something they never could have imagined.
She was no longer the wife who got discarded.
She was the woman who rose from the garbage bag and became a queen, and her story was only beginning.